The dark fate of women in the Roman slave markets. This is what a Roman slave market looked like. On the raised platform, a young, beautiful Syrian woman stands completely exposed. Her only belonging, a simple cloak, lies discarded on the ground behind her. The auctioneer shouts, 6,000 denarii! Who will pay more? She can't shield her body from the staring men below, so she does the only thing she can. She shields her eyes. If she can't see them, maybe, just for a moment, she can pretend she isn't here. At her feet, another young woman, also completely naked, sits in terror. She tries to use her legs as a shield, but the pose just leaves her more vulnerable to the leering crowd. But for the Romans, this was a matter of cold, hard business. At the auction, every woman had to wear a tag around her neck. This tag listed her age, her place of origin, and her defects. For a woman, defects could include things like being lame, having scars, or, most shockingly, being prone to running away or having had abortions. Roman law, particularly as codified in the Digest of Justinian, 21.1, required sellers to disclose any flaws openly. If a buyer discovered a serious defect that the seller had knowingly hidden, he had the right to return the slave and demand a full refund, or to sue for a partial refund for a lesser flaw. Buyers would inspect the women closely, making them walk, turn around, and even undress to check for any hidden problems. But what happened after the sale? What about the women who weren't considered beautiful enough to attract buyers? Where did these enslaved women come from, and how were their prices decided? Let's break it down. First, where did these women come from? They came from everywhere Rome conquered. After a war, the Romans would enslave the entire population of a defeated city. For example, when Rome destroyed the city of Carthage, they took 50,000 survivors, including 25,000 women, and sold them as slaves. Another major source was piracy. Pirates would raid coastal towns and sell the people they kidnapped. The island of Delos was a massive hub for this. Historians say it could process 10,000 slaves in a single day. When a woman arrived at the market, her preparation was designed to break her spirit and maximize her price. She was held in a dark cell and given little food to make her weak and easier to control. Before the sale, she was cleaned up. Her hair might be styled, and her skin rubbed with oil to make her look more attractive to buyers. Then came the titulus. Most shockingly to us, the titulus could include reproductive information. Was she infertile? Had she ever had an abortion? These were considered serious financial defects because they impacted her ability to produce more slave children, who would become the master's property. Her value was calculated not just on her labor, but on the potential of her womb. The price assigned to an enslaved woman in the Roman market was not a random figure. It was a precise and cold-blooded valuation of her potential lifetime of labor and reproduction, which in turn dictated the specific nature of her suffering. This price was the direct result of a calculation that assessed her age, health, origin, skills, and the absence of documented defects. The case of the Syrian woman valued at 6,000 denarii serves as a stark example. To contextualize this sum, a Roman legionary during the early imperial period earned approximately 900 denarii per year. Her value, therefore, represented nearly 7 years of a soldier's gross pay. This high price was reserved for women who were exceptionally beautiful, young, healthy, and visually appealing. These women were purchased for the beds of the wealthy elite. To make an enslaved woman appear more valuable, sellers would sometimes dust her skin with white marble powder or refined chalk. The goal was to make her look paler, as fair skin was a powerful status symbol in Rome. A light complexion suggested a life of leisure indoors, marking a woman as refined and aristocratic, and therefore more desirable for a wealthy household. It was a visual trick to imply she had never done hard labor in the sun. However, this practice was not just deceptive, it was dangerous. A woman who was sold for her flawless skin might soon develop real, painful sores because of the very substance used to sell her. This practice highlights a chilling reality. The well-being of the enslaved woman was completely irrelevant. She was a product to be packaged, even if the packaging itself caused her harm. For the majority of women who did not possess such specific attributes or were considered ugly, the financial valuation was considerably lower. A woman deemed suitable only for manual labor might fetch between 200 and 400 denarii. The older woman would have been valued at the bottom of this scale, perhaps 100 denarii or less, and was likely to be sold as part of a lot to the manager of a large agricultural estate. The Roman agricultural writer Columella, in his work De Re Rustica, provides insight into the management of such slaves. He recommended that all field workers who were chained should be kept in underground barracks. He also noted that enslaved women who bore children might be granted temporary reprieve from the most strenuous labor, not as an act of compassion, but because the birth of a child represented an increase in the master's property. The very lowest tier of enslaved women, which included those who were chronically ill, physically impaired, or marked on their titulus as rebellious, faced the most dire fate. These individuals were often purchased for work in the mines. The historian Diodorus Siculus, describing the mines of Egypt, wrote of the horrific conditions in which all workers, men, women, and children, labored naked in dark, airless tunnels until they perished from exhaustion, injury, or lung disease. This was effectively a death sentence. Roman law did not recognize slave families either. An enslaved captured woman had no legal claim to her children. Masters could, and regularly did, separate mothers from children to maximize profit. Enslaved children, known as runaway, were the property of the master from birth. It was very common for a master to have children with the women he owned. This was simply seen as his right. For the enslaved woman, this created an impossible situation. If she gave birth, her child, called a verna, a homeborn slave, automatically became the master's property. While sometimes these children might be treated slightly better, they were still slaves. The master could choose to keep the child to work in his house, sell the child for profit, or even give the child away as a gift. The famous Roman statesman Cato the Elder actively encouraged his slaves to have children because each new child increased his wealth. The agricultural writer Columella advised that enslaved women who had many children should be rewarded with time off from hard work, not out of kindness, but because they were profitable. If an enslaved woman tried to avoid having the master's child or ended a pregnancy, this was considered a serious crime against the master's property. She could be brutally punished or sold to a much crueler master as a consequence. If an enslaved woman had a child with another enslaved man, the situation was still completely controlled by the master. The family had no legal protection. The master owned the woman, the man, and the child. He could sell the father to a different owner in another city at any time. He could sell the child away from the mother. This happened so often that writers of the time barely even commented on it. It was just normal business. There are surviving letters from Roman times where one person writes to another saying, "The slave woman you sold me gave birth, so I gained an extra slave." The child was seen as a simple bonus, like a farm animal having offspring. A teenage girl was often viewed as a valuable possession. If she was healthy and appealing, her price could reach between 2,000 and 4,000 denarii, or even higher, especially among wealthy families. However, her life in such a household was extremely fragile. She was entirely dependent on the will of the master and mistress. If the master showed unwanted attention, she had no power to resist. And if the mistress grew resentful, the girl could face harsh punishment or even be sold to a disreputable place. One of the most tragic outcomes imaginable. If she were not considered beautiful, a teenage girl would be sold for manual labor for about 1,000 denarii or less. She would be sent to a farm or a workshop, facing a life of hard work, poor food, and little rest. The law called the Senatus Consultum Claudianum showed how little control women had. This law said that if a free woman had a relationship with another man's slave without the slave master's permission, she and her children could be enslaved. The children would then belong to the slave's master. An enslaved woman who tried to escape faced brutal and permanent punishment. Those who were recaptured faced a horrific and permanent brand of shame. Runaways could be tattooed on the face or forehead with the letters FVG for fugitiva, fugitive, a visible, inescapable label that made every future attempt at escape impossible. An even more chilling practice was the riveting of a bronze collar around her neck. One such collar, preserved from antiquity, bears a cruel inscription, which translates to, "Hold me, lest I flee, and return me to my master, Viventius, in the area of Callistus." This was not merely a punishment, it was a public announcement that she was stolen property, turning every person she met into a potential agent of her recapture. The Roman slave trade was not a chaotic free-for-all. It was a highly organized and specialized industry, much like modern businesses. Major trading families and companies operated across the Mediterranean, with networks of agents, shippers, and auctioneers. They often specialized in specific types of human merchandise to better cater to market demands. Traders would specialize based on the source and quality of their goods. For example, some dealers, known as mangones, were generalists, but others built their reputations on specific niches. Some traders specialized in sourcing and selling only the most beautiful women, whom they marketed as concubines, entertainers, or status symbols for the elite. These dealers operated in major urban centers like Rome itself and commanded the highest prices. Other traders focused on strong, healthy laborers for agricultural work, purchasing in bulk from war captives. There were even specialists in educated slaves, tutors, accountants, and doctors who were often Greek captives. This level of organization meant that a buyer looking for a specific kind of slave knew exactly which dealer to visit. This compartmentalization of human misery made the slave trade a cold, calculated, family business that could be passed down through generations. It removed the emotional reality of the transaction, turning the auction block into a supply chain and human beings into specialized products. This efficient, business-like organization is what allowed the Roman economy to be supplied with the millions of slaves it required, demonstrating that the true horror of the system lay not just in its brutality, but in its chilling normality and bureaucratic efficiency. As we reflect on this dark chapter of history, it leaves us with unsettling questions that still resonate today. How does a society become so comfortable with such systematic cruelty? What does it mean that Rome's great achievements were built on the backs of women who had no rights over their own bodies or children? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments below.